Hi, Peter with woodworkernetwork.com, and we're going to design and lay out and complete a rivet table pour, and this will be in the form of a kit that you will be able to take from the very beginning, the form and the pieces of wood and all the materials to make a finished epoxy rivet table. And that then will hopefully graduate you into understanding the basics that you can then apply to pour a much larger table. Make sure it's all clean. And you're going to apply the tape that is going to release the epoxy. The tape needs to have a good bond to the wood. So there we go, tape is on all the way. Okay, so we have all the tape on the bottom and the sides, and now we are going to be ready to assemble the actual form. Should you decide you want to modify this, you can easily do that simply by cutting the bottom to size. Let's say you want the table shorter. You would cut it on your table saw, and you can cut these as well to become a smaller finished product. So the way we have these set up is the longest edges are going to be going over the shortest edges. So the joint will look like this in the end. And you see the two holes on the sides that are going to then go into the pre-drilled holes on the pattern, and there's your mark showing where you need to be. So next step is I like to caulk the entire inside of the form. These forms have to be bathtub tight. In other words, if I was to put water in here, it needs to hold. So the only way to do that is with caulk. So I use an acrylic latex. You can pretty much find these anywhere. A very light bead all the way around, very, very light. I'm going to go all the way around the inside bottom and the sides. You want to make sure that caulk goes all the way into that crack, that you don't have any skips. So now the slabs are in, and they're into the corners. Everything's squared up. You can see this slab has a lot of holes and tears. There's a little crack here. We try to use all those natural features and incorporate that into the piece. These are going to become hold down blocks for these slabs, and this is the way I do it. These blocks go here. I'm going to show you real quick how to wrap one to look like this. Once this is here, should epoxy migrate up or contact this, or you're pouring and a little bit goes over the top, this doesn't become glued to your top. Okay, so now we're ready to clamp these down. This little area is a little bit high, which means epoxy is going to get under there. And all I'm going to do is put a little bit right in here, just very, very small amount. See that? Now the epoxy cannot go up in here and behind your slab. And like I said, I'm putting this on as thin as I humanly possibly can. Okay, take my finger, clean it up. Critical step with any pour is that this surface has to be nuts flat. We need to make sure it's totally flat and level. The reason we have to have this totally level is once we do our pour, if we don't have this level, you're going to have a very deep end here and you're going to have a very shallow end over there if this was off. This would be the part A going in to our mixing bucket. This is a 2-to-1 mix, meaning 2 parts of resin to 1 part epoxy. Now we're going to add the part B, or the catalyst, to the epoxy. And what's going to happen, you can see how clear these both are pouring in, but when I combine them together they get cloudy. These little streamers are basically the epoxy and the catalyst combining and not quite mixed yet. And you want to do this for a good 3 or 4 minutes at least. This has to be mixed. If it's not mixed 100%, any leftover, even a little bit of just resin along the side of the bucket, will mean it's never going to harden. Okay, we're going to add the midnight. We're going to go ahead and do the whole 5 grams and see where that gets us. One thing you need to keep in mind is always have everything clean around you and no open doors. Don't do this outside. Do it in a climate controlled environment where your temperature is 70 degrees or a little bit above. After the pour, you'll notice a whole bunch of bubbles that come up. Don't worry about those. This is usually a time when I just walk away for a few hours and let it rest. While the bubbles are coming up, I fill cracks that are deeper, that are maybe part of the pour, and I kind of help the epoxy just get into those areas. We're going to be just releasing the bubbles. This is about 4, 5, 6 hours later. I'm using a heat gun. You can also use a torch. It's been about 20 hours since the pour, and I have a small bubble that came up. They should pop. There they are, they pop. This is where I'd like to put some swirls into the epoxy. Okay, so we're going to break this down, and I have my screw gun here. And again, these were our hold downs that held the pieces down to the frame. Now you can also have very heavy weights or some type of a bucket. We're going to take the screws out and break down the foam. You can see where the caulk released from that tape very easily. Came right off. Now one trick might be that we didn't do, you could come in and putty these shut if you have holes or knots in your slabs. You putty these shut, and should epoxy penetrate those, they won't seep underneath. If you don't have access to a shop sander, you can use your belt sander and orbital sander in combination. I'm just going to do it back and forth, consistent, even pressure with the belt sander, and basically go over the entire piece systematically so I don't leave any divots. The edges are sanded in the same way, making sure your sander's always moving and consistently, systematically going back and forth and not stopping in any one spot. These are wormholes in this pine, and some of these were filled with the resin when we poured it, which again, as I talked earlier, we have a little bit of staining here, but that's probably kind of cool incorporated into the piece. But we have some other deeper holes that came up where these little bug hole areas with frass came out. I have a 5-minute epoxy, a quick cure 5-minute epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and mix 1 part of A resin into this little cup and an equal part, 1-to-1, of the hardener into the cup. So equal amounts in there. I'm mixing for about 1 minute, which gives me 4 minutes to work. And again, really good along the sides of the cup, really good along the bottom. You literally just dribble it into your defect. And I walk away for a minute, let it sit, kind of do its thing. There's a spot there, and then come back. And we're going to drop down in steps. This is 120, and then 150, then 180, and we're going to end up with 220. Okay, so we set the router up, we put a round over bit, we set our depth to be exactly, come on around, exactly on the edge to take off that much round over. Some lacquer thinner and a rag, and I'm going to do a light tack over the entire piece. Alright, so we're all sanded and tacked, and my next step is I'm going to do 1 pre-step to the Polyx hard wax oil. I'm going to apply a coat of extra thin Osmo extra thin oil. It's a natural oil, but it's a penetrating oil, and on softwoods I like to always have an extra step of hardening to the grain. And so we did the initial coat, saturated it well, let it penetrate, wiped it in, let it sit overnight, put a second coat on, wiped it in. And the trick with that extra thin is to not leave any product, any puddling or any product on the surface. You literally want it to penetrate into the wood. Now that that's done, I'm going to scuff this very lightly with a 400 grit silicon carbide. And you're not sanding this, you're just scuffing it because the sanding is done. You're done sanding. We'll do a quick tack, wiping any dust off. And as soon as you have the oil stirred, you just put a tiny little bit, and this is extremely small amount, on the top. And that's about all it will probably need. Then I take the white polishing pad, which is supplied in your kit, and you apply it. You literally rub it in. And I have the entire area very, very thinly covered. And I'm going to start basically rubbing in what I put on to the point of not leaving any product, very little product behind. And I'm going to repeat this step twice. So once this dries, we'll do it one more time and then we're done. First thing I do is I center the legs on the top, and I decided to go with 5 inches from the end and 2 inches from the sides. You want to make sure you mark the exact perimeter of each one of those circles. Okay, so our next step is going to be to put the inserts in. I use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit, so this will drill a nice flat bottom to receive the insert. And I marked the depth, my depth stop, so I don't go any deeper than I have to. So I center my bit. You're going to screw one of the inserts in to the top, and then there's a little slot you can see on the tops of those. Those are meant to receive a flat-headed or a regular screwdriver. Screw a second one, the one that you're going to put into the hole on the end. And you're just going to drive them in. Keep it nice and 90 degrees. You're just below the surface, and that's where they're going to be. Load up another one. Slots up. In you go. Now that the inserts are in, we're going to basically just take our hex head screws and fasten them into the inserts. I like to start all these by hand so they're loose. So you just start them all by hand, wiggle them in, and once they're all hand started into the thread so you don't cross thread anything, you just snug them down. We'll finish the whole thing off by putting these awesomely made in the USA felt protectors. These are great for they have an adhesive. They're great for on hardwood floors. So there it is, done. And we got ourselves a coffee table.